People, welcome. Thank you so much. Sorry for that. We are still getting used to some technology here. As you can see here at the Poison Pen, unfortunately, we're not a production company, but we're very, very excited to have two of the living greats of science fiction here to discuss their new book, Glorious, which actually today is the release day here at the Poison Pen. It is a phenomenal book. It is the third in a trilogy, so if you haven't read it yet, you get the option or you get the opportunity to read two other great books before you read this one. If you get it here at the store, Mr. Niven has signed it and Mr. Benford has signed some cards for us that are going to go with the book. It's an exclusive here at the Poison Pen, so uh, if you can get it, I definitely welcome you to do so. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Welcome.
Sure thing. The book plates are on the way.
Yep, we either will be getting them today or tomorrow.
You have faith.
Oh, definitely. And Mr. Niven, the great creator of the Ring World, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. Weathering the storm. Getting bored.
Aren't we all? This is why we've started doing a whole bunch of events here virtually to get through this
Yes.
this COVID period, which is it's just awesome. It's fun.
We'll all stay sane if we do this right.
Yes.
Exactly. Now this is exciting because this is the end of a really wonderful trilogy. How did it feel to how's it feel to kind of end this series that you guys have been writing? Or is this the end, I guess, would be the
It is, I think.
It's a good thing for me to hit the end of a book.
Yes.
I don't get postpartum depression anymore.
Yeah, the trick is that we actually started working on this over a decade ago. We thought we could write one book. It ended up that there were so many things to do. It was three involuntarily. But the publisher has supported us, and the fans have and it's sold a whole lot of books, and it's part of the whole general thesis that was actually started to a great extent by Larry, who really gave me my introduction, aside from Olo Stapleton, to big object science fiction.
Yeah, I started the big object trend back in
Right.
the day. Wave.
Maybe we should go over to our slides now.
Sure, absolutely, no problem. All right, let me go ahead and share.
Get tired of looking at us.
Just tell me when I am going to be your Vanna White for this this portion of it.
Start it. Yeah, there we are. That's Ring World.
Yes.
Actually, you can back up one slide. That's Larry's invention, the first, and that's the first story. And we call these big smart objects that people and aliens live in. You might think of a skyscraper as a big smart object, but it's not all that big. And it's not a closed environment. Okay, next one. Let's see the Ring World again. Yeah. Larry, explain where you got the Ring World.
It's a stripped down Dyson sphere. It's a poor man's Dyson sphere. The Ring World, let me back up to the concept of Dyson sphere. As it came to me, it came from Poole Anderson, kind of warped. It's a ping pong ball 93 million miles in radius with generated gravity terraformed on the inside.
Right. Next slide.
When Poole Anderson got to it, it was terraformed on both inside and outside. Great concept. But
there it is.
I wanted to work with. I looked at the Dyson sphere. I remembered that generated gravity is impossible. I saw that you could spin it, but you'd get your gravity out of spin along the radius. Sorry, along the circumference. You'd get only the equator. So I started with just the equator. and that's the ring world. Spun at 770 miles per second for one gravity, and 95 million miles in radius to get the right amount of temperature. And I introduced the shadow squares to get you day and night. Otherwise, it would be always noon. That's, in essence, is the ring world.
Right.
Falls off.
Next.
All right. So this is the Dyson sphere.
And there are other ideas. Like this is a modified version.
Yeah. There are Dyson clouds. And of course, we could always work with a half-finished Dyson sphere.
Right. I mean, you presumably start off with this, and then this is the scaffold.
Your population is still going up when you've got 3 million Earths worth of surface area to work with. You can always expand the edges of a ring world until you've got a Dyson sphere. You have to use ledges in order to make the gravity work, and that's what they do with the bowl of heaven too.
Right. Next. Yeah, oh yes, this is a Dyson bubble of orbiting platforms. They're not connected; they're just in different orbits. But the real problem with this, of course, is how do you stop them from smashing into each other because they have all different orbiting periods. So we were thinking about, what could you do beyond this? Next slide. And trying to find a kind of plot pivot. I mean, after all, this is a Dyson sphere that's getting toward completion. But we didn't want to just do that, right? These can't be rigid shells because that's unstable. That is to say, part of it rotates and the other doesn't. What's going to oppose this attraction to the star, except actually a very rigid structure? So you always have to start at somewhere with a novel. So next, I think the next slide is the relevant one. So, I wanted to remark that a search for Dyson spheres is going on at University of California's Lick Observatory on scavenged time, looking for infrared signatures of Dyson spheres. Just basically cobble together minutes and hours to see if there's something interesting like this. The problem is that there are an enormous number of infrared objects in the night sky, and a Dyson sphere would be an infrared object. It absorbs sunlight and re-emits it as heat. But they're still looking, It's one of the basic principles is look for what you can look for, not for what you expect will exist. That's a Freeman Dyson object. And here's the whole philosophy. This started out, Peter Nichols, the Australian critic, saying, this is big, dumb objects. But it intersects the sense of wonder, I think. I won't read this slide to you, you can read it. The point is that science fiction is really good at depicting these kinds of things just because of the scale. Mm-hmm. Big things inspire awe. And it's what some social critics call the technological sublime, something that's so unusual and so majestic that it has a sublime quality to it in the same way that giant mountains do and so forth. Anything that's big impresses us. We're after all just a bunch of smart apes, right? We're not angels. And following that, you got the O'Neill cylinder colony. And this came up in the 1970s from Jerry O'Neill at Princeton. And this painting is close to one done by Don Davis, whose art you're going to see through the rest of this talk. There's the Earth out there, and then the moon beyond it, not to scale. And this spinning cylinder gives you gravity of a sort, and also sunlight through those open windows. And it was how you could live in space in some form other than, say, the famous Bonestell wheel station, which you saw at the opening of the film 2001. Well, 30 minutes in. Next. Oh, and Rendezvous with Rama, Arthur C. Clarke. That's a reflecting chamber in the distance, letting in sunlight and reflecting it around. And this enormous cylinder that is an enclosed environment. It falls through the solar system and then just goes right on through because its velocity is something like 100 kilometers a second. So it's not bound. It's just passing by. Still, I recommend it. It's quite a good novel with its sense of the mysterious.
He was doing a gravitational acceleration, wasn't he?
He was doing a delta V, yes. You don't pick up any much from zooming in around the sun because the sun's velocity around the galaxy is only about 50 kilometers a second. And in this game, that's not much. So the first novel, Bowl of Heaven, opens up with a starship, for which this is a kind of a figurative stand-in illustration, not ours. And the starship is headed toward a planet called Glory, which looks as though it has an inhabitable Earth-like world around it. But as it's partway along, it runs into some engine trouble and fuel trouble, and then it comes upon something very strange that is, interestingly enough, moving in the same direction. Next, and it is the Bold. Whoop, 3 slides. Go back to. Yeah, one more. They come alongside and suddenly they could see that this is a star tugging along a bowl behind it. And that blue band in the bowl, that's a giant ocean. And the whole thing is enclosed, so it has an atmosphere. And the jet coming out of the star and then through the bowl is the propulsion device. This is an enormous ship made from a star. And that gives you the name of the second volume, which is Ship Star. So then the humans say, what the hell is this? This is a far bigger area than any planet we could go to. And by the way, we're having engine trouble. So let's haul alongside. Next slide. And as they get closer, they see all this interior landscape with vegetation and reflecting mirrors. That's what's around the knothole. It reflects the star's own light back onto the surface of the star, creates a magnetohydrodynamic storm, which then gives us the jet. You can notice that there are helical coils inside the jet. So this is a really strange thing that nobody envisioned, except, of course, us, ever. So they say, why don't we go explore this thing? Next. And so they get in closer still, and they realize it's rotating. So here's the centrifugal gravity, and you can get a maximum of 0.8 Gs. So it's been designed for creatures more or less on an Earth-like environment with a similar gravity. And the artist who did all these illustrations, his name is down there. It's Don Davis, who is an old friend of mine, lives in the desert of California. And we employed to make all this happen, to illustrate the book. All 3 books have original illustrations in them. And the last book, Glorious, has 46 of them. It's quite a bit of art. Next. So that they figure out how are we going to get into this thing. They go close. You can see the enormous hurricanes available on this structure. Each one of those little curlicule hurricanes is the size of the Earth, to give you some perspective. And those are solar panels over there, also intermingled with some vegetation because they're growing crops. So, and there's a desert in between them. So they say, well, let's go through and land, but how do you do that? Well, turns out they look to be a bunch of defensive weapons around the rim. So you don't want to just fly over the rim into this. This is still seen at a distance. They haven't gotten into the near space. So they decide to do something wild and crazy. Next. Oh, I haven't. Yes, here it is. Here's wild and crazy. They fly through into the jet and through what's called the knothole and into the middle of the bowl. You can see the ocean off of there to the left, the ocean and its blue and white clouds. And so they just fly in through magnetohydrodynamic, scooping up a lot of plasma and throwing it out the back in that long jet behind. Notice way over on the right-hand side, there are enormous magnetic field coils. to create the magnetic collar that goes around the knothole, because those coils will produce a magnetic field that wraps around the rim of the knothole. You know, I'm a professor of physics at the University of California, so I throw in all this detail for the engineers. Next, so they get into the bowl, which looks like this when you're actually coasting around in the high atmosphere of it. And you can see clouds, you can see the ocean, you can see reflecting regions. It's a fantastically larger thing, much bigger than a ring world, because a ring world would just be a strip roughly the size of that ocean.
Like
That's all.
The size is kind of arbitrary. If you can find enough mass, you could extend that ring.
Yes, you can. But you don't want to mess up the equilibrium with the star.
No, and you can think of it as either a half Dyson sphere, or a ring world with a lid on it.
Yes, right. And the trick is, you see, that the jet is doing the propulsion, moving the star, but the star is attracting the bowl. So the bowl follows the star through gravitational attraction. That sets the acceleration. And therefore you get all the design parameters out of that constraint. Next, and of course there are things living on this bowl. Here's a view from down on the ground. You can see some humans walking on the ground over there to far left, lower. A thing called zigzag trees, which evolved for this rather turbulent situation. It's a strange place. I mean, they have trees and clouds and stuff, but they also have some very odd things, such as the little thing over on the right, which, seen up close, next slide, is a living creature that looks vaguely like a fish, but it's a balloon. Larry?
Yeah.
Those are steering, you might say, almost like feathers that it uses to navigate. And this thing is enormous. It's about more than a kilometer long.
We had fun with that. It's an entire ecology.
Right.
The fish boat.
Right. And its crew never leaves. It just runs the creature. And the creature knows they're there. The creature's fairly smart. It's a kind of bioengineering we don't have yet. But eventually, in Shipstar, you get to ride one. Let's see. Now, next. So now that's the setup of the first two books. They both occur on the bowl. But then the bowl is headed toward Glory, the star. And there's much political stuff with the resident species, all kinds of aliens in this place, and you get to meet quite a few different ones, including, Larry, the other day you said your favorite was the smart rock.
Oh, I said I had trouble believing in your smart rock.
Right. Well, I would just point out that these computers we're using are based on wafers of silicon, which is a rock. So you can embed intelligence of a sort in rock. So what's this? This is a double planet. And this is, I think, maybe the most original thing in the whole mix. Remember Pluto and Charon? That's what gave us the idea for this. Well, we flew by there years ago. Pluto and Charon both see the same face of the companion all the time. They are both tide locked to each other. A very unusual configuration because, of course, our moon is tide locked to us, but we're not tide locked to each. So the moon, from the moon, you can see all the Earth. It just spins around. But here, we never see the moon rotating because it's been tide locked. And we only see one side. That's true of both of these worlds, though. Each looks at the others, and that's why you can build this artifact in between them, which we call the cobweb. And that bulge in the cobweb is where there is exactly zero local gravity. The two attractions balance. And that's where you dock spaceships, because the whole solar system is run out of this configuration. And so look at the size of this thing. It's thousands of kilometers across. it's an enormous skyscraper, you might say. You could also say it's a ground scraper because it touches the ground on both ends. And so what in the hell built this? Well, it must be something that evolved on these worlds. And they're both worlds with vegetation and mountains and so on them. And so why did they do it? Well, mostly to have room, but also to have an enormous diversity of species. So all the way through Glorious, you meet species you never thought of before, strange life forms that are mostly not interested in humans because humans are just another primate, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, when they meet you, they don't know that you're from another star. You're just another primate, and they're and you have to make your own. So when the humans arrive, there is a curious indifference among most of the life forms because they've been there, done that. They've seen a bunch of aliens come by, and some of them survive and some don't. It's the contrary to the big grand epic of exploration. I mean, it's like landing in Manhattan and going exploring, trying to figure out what's going on here. And the natives have seen it all. They're not impressed with you, in other words. So that was one of the funs about writing the book. Let's see, what next? What is the next slide? Oh, this is an example of a life form that they can't understand. It's hanging there in the air, has very strange patterns in it and so forth. It keeps turning up and they don't know what it is, except it seems interested in humans. And of course, there's somebody who's using this life form to keep track of us and occasionally do other things. This piece of art, by the way, unlike the previous ones that were done by Don Davis, is done by Brenda Guerre, who did all these line drawings for us. She actually showed me some abstract drawings she had been making, and I said, you know, this gives me an idea about these aliens. So we hired her to do a bunch of these illustrations. There are about a dozen, I think, in the book. And Larry and I just like to put illustrations in a book if you can, because nobody else does. Really, nobody.
Exactly. They're beautiful in the book, by the way.
Oh, thanks. If you get the EPUB or the Kindle, all the color is in there. Of course, it's not in the hardcover. And they're all colored illustrations that you can see here. There are a few line drawings, though. I've wondered for a couple of decades now why we have all this digital competence. How come we don't see illustrations in books that the authors can create or hire people to it, as we do, because I can't draw. Or as my grandmother used to say, I come from Southern Alabama. The only thing I can draw is flies.
Usually an additional expense for publishers, and also an added complication, so they shy away. But I remember the illustrations for the known space books back in the 1960s, done by Valentine.
Yes, they had illustrations. And if you really want to capture the sense of wonder, it is really useful to use the eyes of the beholder.
Exactly. Well, and sometimes, you know, I mean, it is a nightmare for the copywriter to get in there and to place the pictures in the right locations. But still, it is a lot of fun. I mean, certain books have done illustrated editions. Just look at the Da Vinci Code illustrated edition book, where, you know, apparently captivated enough people that they wanted to see the locations that the writer was discussing. And it's the same thing with yours, because it helps explain a lot to the reader, which is really important. You're talking about some very, very complex and unique situations that we have to think about abstractly, and it's helpful for us to get our minds around the complex information that you're providing us.
Right. I mean, Larry has on the wall of his home a bunch of the artist's conceptions of the ring world, and also the smoke ring and the infinity trees, the integral trees rather. And to see the artists get inspired and they create these paintings. I thought, why not create the paintings or have them created while you're writing the book? because it actually helps us envision them.
Exactly, and it keeps you going through, and when you're talking about an abstract biological creature, having that drawing there will allow you to figure out how it moves, how it may act, how it, what's its behavior, and even potentially what's its physiology. What does it look like that, it can do what it can do within
Right.
of science and physics.
I've gotten lucky with this kind of thing. Michael Whalen did an illustration for Destiny's Road that became the cover because he thought I had finished the book when I hadn't.
Right.
So
Yeah.
First, and I was able to integrate a tree he drew for his cover illustration. The pool cage, a tree that traps birds for fertilizer.
Yeah. The collaboration between artists and writers is uncommon, but it really should be exploited, particularly if you're doing imaginary things that nobody's seen before.
You often see artists doing work over in Comic Fest, for instance, and science fiction fantasy festivals a little bit more commonly than you see it in other places as well, where somebody gets really inspired by a particular author's work, and we'll do illustrations in the vein of the characters that the author has portrayed. It's fairly common.
That happens a lot.
Let's comment in the mystery scene.
It doesn't happen in the mystery scene, does it?
No, it really doesn't.
No.
They're not as interesting of a bunch as us science fiction people, I think.
No.
And they don't talk to each other. They're afraid to talk to each other.
Well, yeah, you're right. And it touches on a unique aspect of science fiction. There are more collaborative works of fiction in science fiction than there are in the entire rest of all world literature.
Mm-hmm.
Because science fiction comes out of science, and in scientific circles, collaborative, that is multiple author, scientific papers by far outnumber the single author papers.
Absolutely. Well, you can't do science in really in a silo. I mean, it takes so many people to.
You can't now.
Yeah.
But Newton did it all by himself,
True.
And most of Einstein's papers are single author, including the big ones. Yeah, but the point is, science is a culture that's innately collaborative and has been for centuries, and literature is not.
Right.
Except SF.
Now, how did you guys decide to collaborate? How do you collaborate when you're writing a book? Because it is a little bit of a different process in the fact that you're taking two very different voices and you're combining it into the Benford Niven voice.
Right. Well,
conversations, Spanish conversations. We're both science fiction fans.
Right. We've known each other 55 years. And we're good friends, and we just sit around and knock ideas around, and we do several drafts and work on each other's phrasing and all of that stuff. Of course, Larry's done a bunch of collaborations, and so have I. I've collaborated with about half a dozen writers, including Arthur C. Clarke, and Larry with a similar number.
Yeah, half a dozen at least. Most of my collaborations were done with Gary Cornell.
Yeah. And most of your bestsellers, except for this one, Bowl of Heaven. Yeah.
Good commercial line.
He was a terrific writer.
Yeah.
But collaboration is good because we brainstorm things.
Right.
We hit a plot turn and say, what are we going to do now? And we kick it around, and the answer comes out because we're a social species.
Exactly. And you're probably able to get away from kind of as much beta reading as some other genres because of the fact that you're able to kind of kick around ideas and to, say, would my character or would this character say this, or would they behave like this? And yeah, I would assume that you're able to do that a little bit better.
Well, definitely. I mean, I've published hundreds of scientific papers in both physics, astronomy, and biology, of all things. But the trick is that collaboration brings the secret strengths of each party to the fore.
Mm-hmm.
So you can counterbalance each other. And it is interesting to me that that doesn't happen in mainstream fiction at all.
Well, I'm really curious. I mean, how do you manage to combine both the fiction and the science so well within each of your books? I mean, it must be really difficult to be able to say this very complex idea, such as a big giant object or a Dyson sphere, and being able to succinctly describe it to the reader and those complex ideas throughout the book. How do you manage to do that?
You're right in thinking that this is a skill, and it's a hard skill to describe. You have to learn it. Uh, I don't know any way to teach it except by collaborating.
Yes, it's a craft.
Yes.
And all crafts are learned by hands-on. But it helps that both Larry and I come from a scientific community. I mean, his degree is in mathematics and psychology, he always points out, which is another good degree to have if you're a writer. I never took a course in psychology because I knew too many psych majors. The only food fight I ever saw in my life was between psych majors. And of course, my education is in physics. I never actually took a course in English at a university at all because where I went, the University of Oklahoma, you could challenge a course, pay $5, take the final exam. You got B or better. You got no grade in your grade point average, but you got the credit for $5. So I saved money and graduated with my bachelor's degree in 3.5 years. And so did my brother, Jim. I'm also an identical twin. And therefore, I'm used to collaborating. Jim and I have written dozens of papers together.
Absolutely. And that's great that your twin brother also sort of followed in your footsteps, so to speak.
Right. Well, he's written some fiction, but he's also done a lot of papers about alien intelligence and detecting aliens and looking for lurkers near the Earth and things like that. He's published quite a few of those, and I published some with him.
Must be fascinating work getting in there and to delve deep, not only into life outside of our planet, but what makes up our solar systems, what makes up our planets, and doing as much space travel as we can from this little blue planet of ours.
But you can see a long way from here.
That's true. With the right amount of glass, right?
That's right.
I remember it being pointed out to me just how limited it is, but we can see. We don't see the whole galaxy. We see a tiny clump of it in the night sky. And of course, there are other galaxies where stars don't block them. But the nearest star, the stars we can name are the ones we can see with the naked eye. It's a tiny clump.
Yeah.
Really. One of the fun things about doing Facebook Live is we get people who are able to write in while we're doing this. So very lovely lady named Adriana was wondering about your books and your works being adapted into films. Do you hope that this series or trilogy gets adapted into either television or movies, or what's been your experience with some of your other works being adapted or even just purchased
or stolen?
Very well could be. Yeah.
I had an entire novella that I wrote with Elizabeth Millarch stolen and turned into a movie, and then they paid us more than they would have paid to actually buy the rights. A terrible movie called Escape from Mars. And Larry has had innumerable Ringworld.
I have had bad luck with getting into movies and TV. Of course, we always would like to do that. It's a good source of money.
Mm-hmm.
But In Constant Moon was made into a Twilight Zone episode,
It was made by that same firm, I thought. I've never seen it. Have you?
I've seen it, yeah. It
How was it?
made in Canada, so slight alterations in the story. But after all, there's 7 billion versions of the story of it cost awesome. They did a good job. The scriptwriter was a Niven fan, so he kept checking in.
Well, you did better than I did, and it was the same firm.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'd love to see a Ringworld movie. You'd think it would be perfect for IMAX.
Yeah.
It would be. It really would be. The challenge is, even 10 years ago, they weren't as faithful to novels as they are now. So hopefully what will happen is they realize, the authors know their works really well, and they'll be able to turn Ringworld and other series really into much more faithful adaptations from your original ideas, Larry.
I hope. Although you must know that most directors and producers would really prefer to wait until the author is safely dead. Several people I've known who had movies made, like David Brin and Phil Dick, got 1 hour or 2 at the shooting scene, tops.
Yeah.
I mean, Phil Dick came back from seeing some rushes of Blade Runner. He said, it didn't look like anything I imagined, but it really looks good. Whereas Brin and his family were shown a scene or 2 shot over in Arizona, by the way, and then nicely ushered away.
I did get a few minutes on the stage for a TV thing I wrote with David Gerald, A Land of the Lost episode.
Oh.
3 of those with David.
Huh. I think generally anytime you have anything made, and I have had various dramas made on Japanese television, for example, there's always this feeling of disappointment because the movie running on the inside of your head is always better.
Exactly.
You're always rewriting it a little as you go.
Yeah. Right. It's always a problem. I mean, Hemingway didn't like any of the movies made from his novels either.
It's tough. It really is. I think nowadays they're getting a little bit better. I think that books tend to lend themselves a little bit better towards television. We've seen some success out of that. Hopefully they'll do something faithful to either of your novels, because there are some great series out there. The Expanse, for instance, they've done a very nice job of getting into hard science fiction. So it's exciting to see that they're leaning towards that. And of course, they're making another Battlestar Galactica, I think, not too long. So in terms of a tour, what sort of things is a tour doing for you gentlemen in terms of getting the word out there for your book, and what are you most excited about finishing Glorious?
Well, yeah. Go ahead, Larry.
The writings, that is the autograph parties, this is how they have to be done, and we miss the autographings.
Yeah, but as we say at the on the colophon page, a line we deliberately inserted was, "No electrons were harmed in the writing of this novel." I put that in because I met a lady at a cocktail party who really thought that you somehow burned electrons to do computation. She thought that somehow it just vanished in a puff of energy or something. Well, that's what happens when you get all these social science majors. She was a professor in social science right here at UCI. You really can't make this stuff up.
It's definitely a brave new world with signings, because we're so used to having you authors here at the store to be able to sign the books and to be able to meet and greet with everybody. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that's been taken away since we can't all be here together right now. Hopefully that will get
Yeah.
resolved really soon.
But the reverse, and this really is maybe the only good thing I can think that has come out of this plague, is that in a day or two, we're doing a similar thing in a bookstore I never heard of in Tallahassee. Oh, and I think I told you, Larry, that Monday I called up Greg Ketter, who runs Dreamhaven in Minneapolis, the one surviving SF store, and suggested that we do an event there, and that's going to happen. But I also said, why don't you bring in Bob, what's his name, whose store was burned down,
Right.
Uncle Hugo's, and both of you do it, and you both pool your reader base, your customer base, and get, send an email about it, and we can do it all, and we can sign some book plates, and we can make an event. And Greg said, that's a great idea, because we opened the store last week after we picked up all the shattered glass and the damage done. He and his crew forced the looters out of the store using good old-fashioned violence, which in my experience always works. But the point is, he said, we've been open for days and days, and we have yet to have a customer walk in the front door.
Yeah.
Because people have abandoned the whole district.
Right. We've been very fortunate here in Scottsdale. The looting that ended up happening that made national news on our end was blocks away, but fortunately the bookstore was spared. But unfortunately, places like Uncle Edgar's and Uncle Hugo's were horribly destroyed. So
burned to the ground.
We talk about independent bookstores, and as much as we like to be we would like to be the most popular, it's a small community, and I think that we all really support each other. So for us to lose a bookstore like that is just really pretty tragic. I mean, they were the longest running mystery bookstore in the country, Uncle Edgar's. So we are really sad to see that happen.
Right. Yeah, there are a lot more mystery bookstores than there are SF. In fact, I think you can count all the SF bookstores on the continent on two hands.
Exactly. Yeah, it's tough. It really is. Being a small bookstore, margins are thin, but we do it because we love it, and we love to bring literature and gentlemen like you to talk about, so much. I mean, it's amazing what you can get out of an author program. We did have a wonderful question from Bruce Grant, and he was wondering if there are any recent movies or TV that either of you have seen that you've liked and had visual text and production that you'd like to see for your work.
Wow. Well, the second Blade Runner movie certainly was impressive visually. It might even have a better plot. But Ex Machina, the SF film of about 3-4 years ago, that was very good, shot in Norway. There's a film coming out in a few months called Archives, which is similar in theme. It's about the reconstruction of a woman from an archive of her memories into a body, which I look forward to seeing. The production values have gotten so good.
It's amazing, isn't it? And even on television,
yeah,
they've just really exploded.
Well, that's what's behind The Expanse.
Yeah,
they're making full use of it. I'd love to see something like one of the old Mars movies, Mars novels made, not the unfortunate John Carter movie, which is True Burroughs, but rather something like Heinlein's Red Planet made. Wouldn't take a lot of great tech. You could shoot it somewhere, actually in Arizona, down up toward Flagstaff, and what's the place with all the great red rocks?
Sedona.
I mean, Sedona looks like Mars. It's red enough.
It's red enough, and you could take out those trees pretty easily now with CGI, so you could really...
Oh, but in Red Planet, there's vegetation.
That's true.
And the roller, the spherical, what was his name? The spherical Martian that's a rather smart animal and all that stuff. I mean, you could certainly do Red Planet. You have to fake some of the canals, but we have canals too. And you could shoot movies in them. Yeah, there's lots of opportunity. Actually, suddenly I remember the only time I ever met Tom Hanks was at the 30th anniversary of 2001, which I had an engraved invitation to, and people like Tom Hanks were there, and nobody else. I mean, nobody else like me, and people from the film, Kerr Dula, and so on. But he told me that he had the option on Stranger in a Strange Land, and he wanted to play the part before he got too old. But he could never get enough support for it. They wouldn't even take a lot of CGI.
Not really. No, it really wouldn't. This is
already he may be too old for that.
Well, yeah, but this is 30 years ago, and he said, "I'm aware that Malcolm Valentine Smith is not supposed to be an old guy,"
Right.
And he was a huge SF fan. I mean, he knew my work. That's rather amazing. And of course, I knew his. And this is before he made Forrest Gump, by the way, which is set in my hometown, Fairhope, Alabama. It was written by a friend of mine who lives in Fairhope.
I tend to judge movies by the quality of the story.
Yes, right.
I've noticed. Well, I like the ones with the science fiction movies that aren't too ambitious, that have a goal and streak right toward it. For instance, Rollerball. For instance, Westworld. Stories that have a wrap-up ending. You don't get those when you go to Mars. There's always an open end for a space voyage. They all come out like 2001.
Right. I mean, you could imagine making The Moon is a Harsh Mistress
Right.
in an enclosed environment. It wouldn't be that different. And Charlie, for example, is a good SF film made from the original story, Flowers for Algernon, which required no special effects.
And step one is you start with a good story.
Yes, exactly.
Flowers
Really good story.
was a great story.
Yeah.
So what's next for you gentlemen that you would like to share with us? What's coming up? What are your plans? Are you planning to write anything? Are you planning to take a short break, or?
I'm working with Stephen Barnes on a story that would be a sequel to the Gildy Arms stories of a few decades ago. And
Yeah. SF mysteries.
Yeah. Science fiction mystery is hard to write, but you can do it.
Right. Asimov did it long ago. Caves of Steel. Well, as far as I'm going, last year I published a book called Rewrite, which is a kind of a thematic sequel to my novel Timescape, which is about a guy who wakes up on his 16th birthday, and he was actually killed in a car accident when he was 42 years old. So something's going on here. And before that, I did the Berlin Project, which is an alternative history of the Manhattan Project in the Second World War, based on people I knew, because I knew almost everyone who's in the novel. I was a postdoc for Edward Teller. But the novel I'm just finishing and turning in is called Shadows of Eternity. And it's about a woman's career in the SETI library two centuries from now, when there are a lot of SETI messages. And you have to understand them and what they imply. And it's been fun, and I'm almost done with it, probably another week.
I like that series. I jarred you into it with the Draco Tavern stories.
With the what?
The Draco Tavern stories.
Oh, yes, exactly right. Exactly. I started writing those stories 20 years ago because I liked his Draco Tavern short little choppy ideas, except I could never do short little choppy in the SETI library. Maybe I should try. But I wrote whole short stories, and a bunch of them have been in the Best of the Year collection. I finally decided I will just shape it into a novel for Simon & Schuster. So that's been kind of fun. I've been publishing a novel a year for about 4 or 5 years in a row, or a book a year at least. Some nonfiction and a best of collection and so forth. And Larry's been doing a good amount. I mean, you just had a book out with Jerry and Steve Barnes.
Yes. The story that started with the legacy of Europe. This was Jerry's last collaboration with us.
Right. Which is a fun series. I mean, lots of interesting detail and a lot of stuff about evolution in there.
Yeah, we tried to design the best Starship Colony story ever written. It was worth a try.
Yes, it's really good because SF writers underestimate how hard it's going to be living on a world that even looks welcoming. The Sue Burke had a novel over a year ago called Semiosis, and the sequel is out about now. Have you got it in your store?
I don't.
Not yet. No, I don't think so.
It's a really good first novel because it's about humans land on a place and slowly realize that the intelligent life form on this planet is plants, not animals, for clear assigned reasons. And they have a kind of communal intelligence that extends over great parts of the planet, completely unlike us. And so it's really a good book. I thought it was the best SF novel I read last year.
I'll have to order it for the store, definitely.
Yes.
I always, whatever, you end up discovering all sorts of great writers by just talking with people and to writers, and I always end up jotting down or keeping in the back of my mind something new and exciting, because you all know what's good out there.
Well, we know some of it. I get at least well over 100 hardcovers a year that are SF. And I subscribe to all the magazines, every single one. There are only about 7 or 8, including Interzone in the UK. So I keep track of things. It's a huge field now.
I've lost track over the years.
Oh, you have to.
Yeah.
I mean, in the 1950s, you could read all the SF novels that came out in a year because you could count them on your hands and feet. But now it's closer to 1,000, and you don't have that many hands and feet.
Absolutely. But, it's a great age for science fiction and fantasy. There's so much out there, especially right now. Hard science fiction really is making a strong comeback. It went away there a few years ago, and now it seems like it's making a real resurgence. This is exciting. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight, taking time out of your busy schedules.
Glad to. I mean, I've never even been in your store, but I must have been very near it because I've been to that area a lot. I mean, I've gone to conferences and stuff at ASU.
We're over in Old Town Scottsdale on the edge of the art district. So if you ever get the chance to come on down, we're a fun place. And then, we're surrounded by great restaurants and great art galleries. And
that museum there, the art museum, is very good.
Absolutely. And there's a new museum that opened not too far from the bookstore here called the Museum of the West. We'll give them a little plug because they do some really cool stuff over here in Scottsdale. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and end the Facebook Live. You can get Glorious starting today. Today is the release date for the book. You can pick this up at any great bookstore. Pick it up from us. Pick it up from independent science fiction fantasy bookstore.
Right.
Support your writers and your authors however you can.
Larry and I are only doing independents. We're not doing any Barnes and Nobles or Books A Million.
They're, I say so long as people can read and continue reading, we're in good company.
That's right, despite the efforts of so many schools.
And at that note, gentlemen, have a great night. Thank you so much. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Facebook. Take care.
Thank you.